Do you want to know more about shelf layouts? Why don't you watch this segment and see how we put the Sayreville running track on a shelf here on my model railroad. Hello everyone, Joe from Central Jersey Conrail and InScale. Welcome back. This is the next segment in our construction series. This is episode 21. Today we're going to be constructing the Sayreville running track in Gillespie branch. So just to briefly tell you what this is all about. So I wanted to tie in the Gillespie branch and the Sayreville running track onto the Sayreville secondary. So I decided to build a 66 by 14 shelf and attach it over by the big helix. I did complete backdrop, lighting, and valance, and connected it in because I wanted to represent some more traffic and showcase some of the industries down in the Parlin area of New Jersey, and also the big one was I wanted to represent the Sunshine Biscuit Corporation because it's kind of got a little personal meaning to me because that's where my grandfather worked. So like we spoke last time, this segment is going to be, like a crash course in building a shelf layout. I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at it. We're working really quickly because I'm trying to keep the time frame rolling here and get this done. Right now, the construction was about a month and a half to get everything done that you see here in this video. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking right now. Let's just get into it. First segment, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you on an aerial tour using Google Earth. Okay, everyone. So before we get started designing and building the Sayreville running tracks and the Gillespie branches, let's take a look at the railroad itself through Google Earth, and I'll take you through a walking tour. But before we do that, let's go ahead and click over to the Raritan River Railroad Historical Society. If you're interested in this railroad, they have a wonderful, packed full website with a lot of information. They apparently have their own branch of the National Railway Historical Society. So check out their website. You can see the website right up here, and they got a lot of information. So the railroad was initially built from Bound Brook down to South Amboy. So that's I'm going to look at more for our time period of 1987. But let's go backdate it a little bit further. So in 1976, when Conrail was formed, initially the Raritan River Railroad was going to be rolled into Conrail. But the owners of the railroad fought it in court and won, and they hence got to operate independently. But sadly, in 1980, they ended up filing for bankruptcy, and then they rolled into Conrail anyway. It doesn't really say much here on the website, but I kind of wonder, Raritan River Railroad got really heavy into the incentive per diem boxcar craze, and they bought a ton of 50-foot boxcars. And once the decision was handed down by the ICC that it was illegal, then they had all these boxcars come back and on property, and they didn't know that it was a loss of revenue for them. So I kind of think that may have pushed the Raritan River Railroad into bankruptcy. So the Raritan River Railroad was broken down in they had the Gillespie Run, and they had the Phoenix Division, which was down here, and then they had this division here, which I can't remember what the name of it was. It's buried deep in all this information. So go check it out. Okay, so I'm going to use Google Earth here to kind of do like an aerial pictorial and show you how the Sayreville running track and the Gillespie branches were laid out. So if we zoom down here to the Browns yard, you can see that the entrance to this railroad area is here. This is the beginning of the Gillespie branch. Now, prior to, in the Raritan River Railroad days, so prior to 1980, this was not connected. Conrail did this because if we take a quick flight over here to South Amboy, you can see this is the old, the end of the Amboy Secondary. This was the coal marshaling area. This was the Pant Leg Dumper. But if you look down here, this rail cut that comes down through here and takes this turn down in the South Amboy, and then it connects over with the New York and Long Branch. This was actually the site of the Raritan River Railroad's locomotive shops. And then they connected here to get their freight, and then they brought it all the way back down. So now jumping back down to the Gillespie branch over here near Browns Yard. The railroad crosses Bordentown Avenue, and then it proceeds past the Sunshine Biscuit plant. The big reason I want to feature this is because this is where my grandfather worked, and I want to pay tribute to him. Back in the 80s, this is no longer Sunshine Biscuit. This is now like an industrial park. But this would have been here, the baking area, and this here, and then this over here was their Northeast headquarters for all the Sunshine company in the Northeast. So this is where the headquarters building was. In the day when they were baking here, they would get loads of flour and other dry materials would come in here in hoppers. You can see the rail line would cut back through here. And then back down here was the loading area where they unloaded tank cars of corn syrup, right in this area here. So we're going to try and feature that in as best as possible. It's going to be a low relief building. I'm not going to put in all this area. This is mostly warehouse in here. This was the baking area and packaging in this area. So that's what we're going to do with Sunshine. So if we head this way towards Gillespie Branch, up to Gillespie Branch, we can see that there's some other old industrial sites. Now what you need to realize about this area, South Amboy, Parlin, and South River and Sayreville, this was a booming area in the 80s. We're talking lots of chemical plants, lots of traffic coming through here. So one of the big sites is, if we go down here, this was an old chemical plant. I can't find any information of it. They went out of business in the 60s. And then you come down to Gillespie Branch to the Y. Now the Phoenix division would go this way, and this was the New Brunswick division. But then once Conrail took it over, this track here became the Sayreville Running track. So this site right here is the old Hercules site. This is where they made gun cotton. So what they would do is they would take a cellulose material and they would saturate it with nitric acid to make an explosive. So if we scroll back to 1995, you can see that this was such a large sprawling complex. Apparently they had an explosion here in the 50s, did a lot of damage and killed a lot of people. Then they went out of business. Let's see, they started shutting down operations in 2006, 2007, 8, 9. They were demolishing. And by 2016, not much was left. And there was a lot. This is a super fun site because there was a lot of cleanup and a lot of contamination here. So as you can see, looking at these 1995 shots, you can see that there's a lot of rail traffic coming into Hercules. So hence, it was a large customer for Conrail on the Sayreville Running track. So if we come back to our current day configuration, we're going to scroll up, and then this was the former DuPont site. Actually, I still believe it is DuPont. I can't find too much information on it. But back in the 80s and 90s, they were making lacquers for paint lacquers. So they did have a lot of rail traffic in here. Not so much in this 96 shot. You can see a lot of the stuff looks like it's overgrown. There is some tank cars in here, but more so in the 80s. This place was really booming with rail traffic. So as you can see, this is the current day configuration. I don't think they're doing much work because they're converting a lot of these buildings to solar farm. So now we're going to head back up the Sayreville Running track. Now this here is the location of what was once the Parlin yard. So this is an older shot of the Parlin yard. If you go to historical aerials and you can look at older shots from the 80s, this was actually a 4-track yard on the curve, and then they had 2 stub ends in here so they could put a lot of cars in here. My problem is I initially wanted to do the Parlin yard. However, I don't like the configuration of it. It's not going to work into the track plan or the space that I have, so we're going to bypass the Parlin yard. But most of Conrail's switchers were based here. So the crew would call in at Brown's and they get a jitney over to here to pick up the switchers and go down and do the track, down the track to do the work. Now, from what I can gather was that this job was a yard job. It was, I think it was YP42. And I do read some reports that this may have been a multiple times a day job, depending on plant traffic. So they may have done a switch job in the morning and then come back on the night shift to do another switch job. So I have read about that happening. I don't know how frequent that was, but all of their, like I said, all of their operations would have been based out of the Parlin yard. So now we're going to proceed down through Parlin. You can see there's a lot of open territory down here. Back in the 80s, a lot of sand. So back in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of sand mining operations down in here. But as you can see, as days go by, property values are higher in New Jersey than sand is. So they are just closing down. So the next big customer that's still very active on the Sayreville running track is Continental Steel. Continental Steel buys scrap steel from most scrap vendors in the area, and they also get shipments in gondolas of scrap. And what they do is they run an electric arc furnace to make steel rebar. Now, from what I understand, but I'm not 100% positive, is that the rebar is just the standard non-coated rebar. I don't think they do any coating at this facility. So it is a rather large facility. You can see they have a lot of materials on the ground. They get a lot of scrap in. So this is very interesting. Now, I don't think we are not going to model this. This is going to be too big of a facility to put on that little shelf. However, I do want to represent some traffic going into Continental Steel, because this is probably one of 3 only operating steel plants here in New Jersey. Even in the 80s, there wasn't many left. So yeah, definitely going to run, like, I put a stub end track to represent, you know, some gondolas of scrap getting dropped off. Now, as you can see from these aerial shots, even if I tune it back to 1995, well, it's real fuzzy, but when you look at the 87 shot on historical areas, it's much clearer than this. You don't see very many flat cars going out, so I don't think they shipped the rebar out on rail. I think a lot of it went out by truck, so I think just their raw materials came in by rail. So now proceeding further down the Sayreville running track, we come to very close to the end here. This is the Middlesex County MUA. It's a large sewage treatment plant. Now in the 80s, this wasn't there, and oh, I'm sorry, these were there, but this little portion all over in here was not there. So it was just this area. Now the reason this is important is because they got chlorine in over here on their chlorine spur, and they got quite a few cars, because if you look back on 95, you can't really see, but in 87 they got like 4 cars spotted in here on the chlorine spur. So you could see it was active. So the next little spot we're going to go to is the big one. This is National Lead, the former site of the National Lead. National Lead here was actually the history of National Lead. So National Lead did all kinds of products using lead, and they did a lot with paint. So their own brand of paint was known as Dutch Boy, and the way that it got the name Dutch Boy was because the way they made their pigments was the English Dutch method to make pigments of paint. So this facility here actually served 2 purposes for National Lead. Number one, they made sulfuric acid over in this area, and down here they used titanium ore to make titanium oxide pigment. So this site now, as you can see, there's a lot of cleanup going on. It's a very contaminated area. I read some stories on the River Railroad page of people being told as a kid, don't swim in the green water, because this is where they put the sulfur dioxide was in these wading pools. So sulfur dioxide was a precursor to the sulfuric acid in the process. So the way, if we bump back here to 1995, you can see that the plant was rather large. So here is the cookers for the sulfuric acid production. So they bring in molten sulfur. They heat it up in this, and through other processes of oxidation, they would make their sulfuric acid. Now, if you come down to this area here, this is where the titanium dioxide pigment was made. So they used this over here was their wharf where they brought in barges or ships to offload, and then they also brought in rail cars in this area here, and then the ore was brought over to the processing area by conveyor belts. So pretty much the way titanium dioxide is made is you take that titanium ore, and then you infuse it or mix it with the sulfuric acid, if you will, and then it creates the pigment. So lots of traffic going in and out of here in the 80s. Very full of tank cars. This area was full of cars. They had a lot of cars staged for the switch jobs. So this area here in the 80s, this is a bad picture, but there was 3 tracks here, and then there was a 4th stub track. So they use this as kind of a yard to switch for National Lead and also for the chlorine spur for MUA. Okay, so I know I threw a lot of information. It was kind of like a crash course in history here, but as you can see, this whole area could be a layout of its own, and you know, something to really think about if you're interested in it. So what the industries that I've picked to represent this area is going to be, I'm going to try and tie in National Lead. Well, first of all, I'm not going to do the Parlin yard, so we're going to do this little yard here that was these 4 tracks. So it was 3 double-ended tracks and then the 1 stub-end track that went back this way. You can't, it's not even there anymore. And then I'll have a little spur off that air switching area there for the chlorine unloading facility. What I think we're going to do is the chlorine little spur. I'm not, scenery-wise, I'm not going to put too much, but I'm going to try to put in some, you know, facilities. We're gonna have to flip it because, you know, because of the way the layout is, and I'm just going to put some kind of buildings over in this general area to represent National Lead. I know they had a water tower. I'm thinking like one of those Walther's North Island refinery kits, the burner towers to use to represent the sulfuric acid facility. And you know, they had a lot of rectangular style buildings that we could probably do some low relief, a lot of piping, and the water tower was right. Where was it? It was down. It's not even in this shot here, but in the 80s there was a water tower right in this area here. So that's how I think we're going to represent National Lead as best we can, but mostly we're going to represent National Lead with the traffic that moves in and out of here. So the other facility that I want to tie in somehow is going to be Continental Steel. I think I'll just represent it down in this area here. You know, maybe a couple of gondolas each time, full of scrap to be moved. And then, of course, the Sunshine Biscuit plant. So those are the industries we're looking at trying to fit in here. Is the Sunshine Biscuit. We're going to look at National Lead, Continental Steel, and the chlorine spur for the sewage treatment plant. All these other facilities, I mean, you're talking about mass amounts of traffic. I mean, it'd be great to do, if I had more room, to do something with Hercules. But even here, I mean, you could see that there was a lot of rail spurs in here. So you're talking, that's a big job. That's a lot of freight in there. So you know, the Sayreville Running track back in the 80s, we're looking at, they used all this area here for car storage. This branch line here, if you look, there was to go into New Brunswick, there was actually a drawbridge, but it does say in the website that this drawbridge was hit by a barge, and hence it's not operational, so that's why it's stuck in the open position. So trains never could make it down into New Brunswick. So they use this mostly as car storage and switching. But yeah, this area was probably a sight to see back in the mid to early 80s with all this traffic that was moving in here. But just like wherever else in New Jersey, property values went up, tax rates went up, utilities went up. Consequently, it wasn't good for big business. Environmental regulations were tightened up for obvious reasons. So these big heavy industries, they went south. They went to Mexico. So National Lead moved their acid production down to Mexico City. Their titanium oxide production was moved elsewhere. Sunshine Biscuit was bought out by Nabisco. Hercules doesn't even make gun cotton anymore. They make mostly other chemicals and plastics. The DuPont, they moved most of their production elsewhere as well. So as you can see, it's now just a vast industrial wasteland. Okay. So that wraps up the quick walking tour. So let's get down in the layout room and we'll get planning and building. Okay, first step is to get our bench work together. As I indicated, it's 66 by 14. I got my little helper helping me hold the bench work. Then I attached the bench work to the wall using number 3 wood screws right into the studs. I also attached the new benchwork to the existing benchwork using carriage bolts. Now I'm installing 1x2s to the sheetrock for the Masonite Backdrop. I run a bead of PL Premium construction adhesive on the wood for the Masonite to adhere to. Here we are fitting the Masonite Backdrop in. I took the time to cut that notch out to avoid the existing valance because I didn't want to take the existing valance down. This time around I used my brad nailer because there was no curves and it was all flat, and it really sped up the process. Here we're installing the lighting. I had this fixture left over from when I did the lights in the layout room. Here we are starting to assemble the valance. I use the same construction processes in doing the valance for the rest of the room, so if you're curious if there's any steps you can't see, just refer back to that video. Again, we're using the brad nailer for the valance because this is all flat. It just made it that much easier. Here we are getting started with spackle. First I would go ahead and spackle all the nail holes in the Masonite, and then you'll see I get started on doing the tape joints for the valance. You know, throughout this whole process my spackling has just gotten so much better because we're just doing it so often. Here I'm using paper tape to cover the joint in the center. I put an inside corner bead in the joint there to hide the corner there. Here I'm using an outside corner bead to hide the edge here, and I'm just making sure to backfill it in with some spackle so it doesn't crack. Okay, so after doing 3 coats of spackle and sanding it nice and smooth, we came back and we're doing our primer now. I'm using the Kills brand primer again. It's nice and smooth and comes out really good. You'll also notice that I do paint the back of the valance with the primer, so it makes it appear a little brighter. This time around I learned something very valuable. When you're doing any kind of spackle sanding and you get a lot of spackle dust, it goes everywhere. Make sure you do a really good cleaning because or else it just gums up your locomotives. I had to do a lot of cleaning on my locomotives for about a week afterwards. Also, again, you'll notice where the valance meets the sheetrock ceiling, the sheetrock is a little uneven, so that little light is shining through. I just used caulk and I caulked in it all, and it covered it all up. You also notice that this time that notch is gone. I used tape and spackle to cover it over so you can't see it, so it's all nice and smooth. Okay, here we are getting started painting the sky color. This time around I didn't do the gradients like I did before. I didn't have the darker color to blend it. So what we're going to do is we'll vary the color variations when we do the clouds on this section. So also I'm taking the time, the fuzz that comes off the roller and stuck in the paint, I'm getting that out of the paint because we don't want that to dry in there, because when we're taking photographs that will show up in our pictures. So just take that extra step now to get it taken care of. Now, so the primer's dry, I caulked, and now I'm going back with the sealing white and doing the outside of the valance. Make sure you do your caulking before you paint the final color so the caulk doesn't turn yellow. So now it's time to get track planning. Okay, so here is what happened. Initially in designing and planning, this area, which is the Sayreville Running track and the Gillespie branch down there in Sayreville. In the planning phases, I had planned for like a nice 4-track stub end yard down here to represent traffic going in and out of the National Lead facility, the Middlesex MUA, and Continental Steel. But what I ran into is, if you can see here on all my paper turnouts, there wasn't enough length to build a decent ladder and still have capacity. I could have built a ladder, but then we would end up with only like 1 car capacity on each track, and it wouldn't have really portrayed what I was looking for. So what I decided to do was scrap that idea and started playing around with the track. And what I came up with was this design here, and I felt that this design kind of kept with the flavor of the prototype, you know, with all the turns and the twisting and the spur lines and all the runarounds, because down on the Sayreville Running track there was all these sidings and stuff for a lot of capacity for, you know, a lot of cars. So I thought by doing this visually, it confuses you a little bit and it kind of keeps with that flavor. So what happens is the Gillespie branch departs from the main line over here, and then it curves down and it makes this turn over here and crosses Bordentown Avenue. This here is the Sunshine facility, and then the track curves past the Sunshine facility. So now let's talk about Sunshine. So initially the bakery for Sunshine Biscuits in the Northeast was in Long Island. Sometime around 1965, they closed the facility in Long Island and decided to make a move to Sayreville. They found this facility here, which was originally a roofing insulation company, and they opened this plant in 1965. The facility is really large. It's 1,300 feet long and it's 275 feet wide. Now, that would have brought the plant out pretty much occupying the whole space of the shelf layout. So what I had to do is I had to go through and do multiple revisions of compression to compress the building. So I came up with an overall width of 80 feet out to this point and 320 feet long. So when I was doing the compression for the building, what I had to do is I had to omit some elements. Mostly I omitted the depth. There was no reason to have that 275 feet wide. So I cut it back to 80 feet. I thought that was still visually portrayed the prototype, but it didn't occupy too much of the space and take up all of the track plan. So now, even though it's not prototypical, I had to put in a runaround there. I'm still toying with the idea of moving this turnout around the curve over on the other side of Bordentown Ave, and so we have more of a runaround to put more capacity, because right now it's a 5-car capacity runaround. This way I can make a little more room. So past the plant, this is where the spur for the plant is for the Sunshine. This is where the runaround track ends. I put a turnout in here so I can put a spur line in to represent Continental Steel. I really wanted to do something with Continental Steel because, like I said in the past, that this was one of the last 2 remaining steel plants in New Jersey. So with this little spur, I'm going to bump this benchwork out about like 3 more inches in this area and bring it all the way down. That will allow me to extend this little spur line, and you'll be able to get 2 gondolas in there. So at the beginning of the session, we'll drop 2 loaded gondolas of scrap, and on the second trick for the night shift, they'll pick up the gondolas, and one of the gondolas I'll put a rebar load in as outbound traffic. So that's how we'll represent Continental Steel, just with this spur line. So now coming down here, I put in these turnouts here, and then this line branches off. What's going to happen is, in this, like I said, there's going to be 3 more additional inches here. This will give us a 3-car capacity on each track. So that gives you 6 total cars to represent National Lead. There's still plenty of real estate in here, plus the 3 inches that's going to be added to add some of the apparatus, you know, like the burners, some of the condensing towers, and some tanks and piping. Also the unloading platform for the tank cars here. So it'll give us a good representation of National Lead, a part of the plant. You know, the way I'm going to do it is so that the plant looks like it continues on off the layout. And we'll run a chain link fence in here to differentiate the boundaries of the plant. This little tail here that kind of just runs off the end, I needed that. And when I was designing this area here, I thought about everything that I learned in the Toms River Industrial, and that is, you know, we're going to put all these cars down here. We're going to have 6 cars in here, and we're going to have 1 car over here. We're going to have 2 in here, and we're going to have 3 or 4 back in here. I needed room to make the maneuvers and pull it out. So I put this tail in here, kind of just running off to, you know, so I had room to make that pull out of Sunshine. And then I curved this line around to the backdrop, and that's going to be for the MUA. We're going to get 1 tank car in there, so to represent the chlorine unloading area. And again, we'll put some more fencing in here and kind of section off the plant. And then what I need to represent the sewage treatment plant, I'll put up on the backdrop as a low relief building. So that's the rendition of the Sayreville running track in the Gillespie branch. So now what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start cutting these templates, and we're going to go up and start cutting our sub-row bed so we can get that in. Okay, so here we are getting our first piece of sub-row bed in. Just take the time to make sure you're at the grade or level that you want. So that's what we're doing here. We're just checking to make sure it's level, because Sayreville area was generally level. There was no grades. Okay, here I am cutting the brown paper to make my template, and I'll take that upstairs and lay that on my plywood so I can cut the template to the shape that I need. Again, we're using 1/2-inch birch plywood to keep consistency throughout the layout. Here I am putting in one of the risers. My risers are 1x4s and 1x2s just screwed and glued together, and then I just screw them into the joists on the benchwork. Now I'm attaching the sub-row bed to the joists. I'm using glue and wood screws. I also make sure to make a little countersink so that the screw heads go down below the surface so you don't have those bumps in the cork. So this scene here, I'm attaching the sub-row bed to the existing main line. A very bad spot here. As you notice, you'll see the 2 locomotives. Well, one of them got knocked off, and then I got the idea I better move the other one so that one doesn't fall. So the GP20 was damaged and needs to be repaired. Okay, here we are getting started with cork. First I pre-soak all my cork in water, and then I use carpenter's glue to attach it to the plywood. And then I'll use push pins to hold it in place while the glue dries. Okay, here we are, finished up the last few pieces of cork, and getting ready to spackle the cork again, and then I'll spray paint it. So here I am starting to lay track. So my track laying abilities have come a long way from that first time that we started over in Lakehurst. Here I'm just taking the time and eyeballing everything, making sure everything looks straight and fits up properly. So as you can see, there's a train coming up the helix. It's really enjoyable to be down there working and doing track work and other stuff on the layout and just have trains running by themselves. It's very relaxing and everything's running really smooth. So the big thing that I decided is here, that little blank spot there that turns off to the right. That's for Continental Steel. What I've decided to do was I insulated that track because that's going to be my programming track as well. I just want to have a programming track on the layout because I'm tired of using that portable one. So this way what I'll do is I'll wire it into a switch and you'll select from track power or programming track. Okay, so here I am wiring in the feeders to put the feeders down to the bus line so we can power it up and start testing. And that's how we put together the Sayreville running track. Okay everyone, so there you have it, Sayreville running track, our branch line on a shelf. Came out really well. So let's talk about it real quick. In initial design, I'd expected a whole lot more, but with the, forgetting to take into account that how much a yard ladder takes up in length versus width, I had to make some modifications to the track plan, but I'm pretty happy with the way it came out because let's look at it from this perspective, capacity-wise. So we look at National Lead, that's 4 more cars per cycle, so that's in the 16 tank cars. We look at the chlorine spur for the MUA, that's another tank car per cycle, so that's another 4 tank cars. Continental Steel's got 2 gondolas per cycle, that's another 8 to add. And then Sunshine, we got another 8 cars, 4 tanks and 4 hoppers. So in total, you're looking at like 36 more cars to add to the layout. So just this little bit of space here, even though it's, 2 cars, 4 cars, and 3 cars, it adds up quickly. So, it's something to take into account. Just this little bit of areas add that much more traffic coming in and out of the layout. So, and that's really what I'm looking for. So I think I hit the home run here. In retrospect, the runaround, I wish it had been a little longer. It's only 5 cars. But I think we're going to make up for that because this is going to be split. The YJ SA0203 is going. Let me explain it to you this way. When it runs on a Saturday, it's called the SA03, and when it's run on the weekdays, it's called the SA02, as per the Conrail timetable. So we're going to be splitting that into 2 jobs because we're going to have a morning switch job and then we'll have a night switch job, so a second trick. So what's going to end up happening is we'll come down on the first trick and we'll hit the runaround and we'll do 2 industries, Sunshine and maybe the chlorine spur. And then on the second trick we'll come down and we'll do the National Lead and the Continental Steel. So breaking it up, I'll be able to utilize that little 5-track runaround and to my abilities. So I think that's going to make up for the inadequacies in the track design. So otherwise, I think it came out really well. We worked really hard to get it done, and a month and a half. Got it from nothing to where you see it behind me, including the mock-up of the Sunshine facility. So also, as you can see over my shoulder here, I got a switcher stationed down in here. I got a GP15-1. So what's going to happen is I'm going to try and follow the prototype, and we're going to have an engine assigned to this area, and it was stationed down in the Parlin yard, so that's what I'm going to be doing there. So this one locomotive is always going to sit down there, And what'll happen is the crew will call in at Brown's, and then I'll get a ride over to Parlin to pick up the locomotive, and then they'll come down and start switching, and then go back to Brown's, drop off their empties, pick up their loads, and bring them back down and drop it off. So that's how I'm looking at running this. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to doing an op session on this for at least a month or two. Number one, I got to get a lot more cars. I found out that I have another big deficiency in my roster. I'm probably going to buy another 20 tank cars, and I need at least another 8 or 10 gondola cars. So it's going to take me some time, because that stuff adds up pretty quickly. That's like another $500 worth of cars. So yeah, so I got to get some more cars down here. And secondly, it would really help with the switching if I have the fascia up, so I can install the panel to control the turnouts. That'll just make it go that much smoother. So I think another month or two, and then we'll be able to do an ops video so you can see how I'm going to run this. So let's talk about upcoming construction series videos. So this is wrapping it up. This is episode 21. We're going to get started, hopefully in a week or two. I'm going to get started right on the fascia for episode 22. And we're going to wrap the fascia around from Englishtown all the way around down to here. And then in episode 23, I'm not sure if I'm going to split it out or not. I may try to fit it all in and do the wiring for the panels. I'm going to skip the yard panels, and we'll go back to it later. So that's what you can look at for coming up. Now, I've indicated on my Facebook page, I also did a live stream a couple weeks ago. We're going to be having to push back our timeline a little more again, because, this took a month and a half, and I hit the burnout phase, got slow on work, and, it's summertime, there's a lot of family obligations going on. So I think I'm going to say maybe after the first of the year for full op sessions with guest operators. I'm not too sure right now, but I'm going to leave it open to say January 1st, because that'll give me more time to. I don't want to be rushing, and like I said in my live stream, it's just a date that I would like to keep in mind, so that I keep moving forward and don't just it doesn't turn into the eternal construction project down here. And also, I think there was a couple questions about the shelf branch line over in the other room for the Amboy secondary. Again, I'm going to leave that till the first of the year. I'm going to have that coincide with the beginning of the op sessions. So look for that back in January. So that's all I have for you this time. I hope you guys enjoyed following along. It was a lot of fun putting this together, doing the research. It was fun. I really enjoyed doing that. And I also like teaching everybody about all this, all these industries and all these businesses and stuff, because not many people really realize it. So for this little section here, I think I did a lot of legwork for you. So if you're looking for a model railroad to put together, I think that's a good choice right there. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed following along. Thanks for following, and we'll see you next time on Central Jersey Conrail and Scale.